Hello, and welcome to today's presentation. Allow us a moment to appreciate this dress. What do you think about it? Gorgeous? Simple? Elegant? Too white? Too much? No. Hang on to that thought as this is about to get crazier. Now imagine that person wearing this beautiful white dress, attending a funeral, and on top of that, she is wearing a pirate hat. Does it make sense at all? Well, I am as confused as you. And on that note, please meet me, Princess Jasmine. No, just Jasmine. And today I am going to walk us through admiring the dress. No, we're not. We're going to talk about linguistic content versus the extralingual context on the three levels: micro, macro, and mega context. Now, I wouldn't be so bad that I would leave you hanging about the background, the story. Actually, there's a story of this picture, how I put it together, inspiration. So, there was a princess, or not exactly, but there's a story of a woman that I have read quite a long time ago. She's a French noblewoman whose husband was executed by the French king because the king thought he is a spy for the English people. So that was the French versus English war. And upon her husband's death, she decided she wanted to take revenge. So she made um she made like she made him herself an ally to the English king. So the English king gave her ships and her crew, and she became a pirate, looting French ports, sinking their ships until the French realized that it was their own noblewoman who is behind all of this, but they were not able to catch her until she became legend. And subsequently, she became a myth. So, yeah, there's actually a person behind this story. And before we go on into the further details, let us break down the meaning or like definition of terms. Micro context is on the word group or sentence level or word level. Macro is on the bigger picture, so we're going to talk about the paragraph. And mega is going bigger. How do these things relate as a whole into the chapter, the book, or the entire series, if there are? Now, thanks for studylive.net for sharing this wonderful picture or infograph. Now, this is quite a summary of how literary criticism or the fields of literary criticism would interact and affect a literary work. However, under linguistic content, we are cutting it off from everything: author, the situations, or the cultural backgrounds during that time. We are cutting it off, aka just like what we did with the dress. So that's part one. So linguistic analysis is basically objective in nature because 80 to 90% of the time, readers would come up or end up with the same analysis or interpretation or appreciation of the text because it is textual. There's really nothing there are no other things. You're looking at the same picture from the same angle. Another thing, it is quantitative. Yes, it's literature, but we will be doing some countings, just like what we do with haiku, 5, 7, 5 syllables. We'll also be counting the how often an author would use such words, what's their general word count. So we're going to look into those things. So linguistic content is mostly or primary, or some theories would even push that formalism pushed linguistic content analysis, or is the other way around. So this is used by formalism, structuralism, and post-structuralism, who believe that a text should be appreciated for its literary sense, just like art should be appreciated for art's sake. Thus, a literary work should be appreciated based on how the author would use words and expressions or the language itself, as on how effective the language was used by the author. So by using literary devices such as our figures of speech, similes, metaphor, personifications, literary elements like characterization, plot. How do they go about it? Did they use foreshadowing or a linear plot? How do they develop the characters? How does the author make use of words to give us the setting of that place? Another one, we will look into phonetic analysis, such as assonance, alliteration, the use of rhymes, the words of word stress to impact the meaning. And we also use content clues as a reader or a critic. We use content clues to unlock difficulties within the text. And another factor, a special factor would be graphology or text visualization. These are, for example, our wonderful octopus. Now, from the picture alone, you could generally have the idea of what it's going to be about. Now, on that note, I do have a question. Is it fair that authors be judged primarily on how effective they use language in in their written work? Does it put non-native speakers at a disadvantage because they don't know the quirkiness of the language? Does it also put authors who do not have any formal background to use those eloquent words that seasoned authors are using? Does it put them at a disadvantage? If so, well, what are your thoughts about it? And on that note, we um we have here some guide questions. So again, what does the text say? What motives are the words in? Such as, for example, let's take Edgar Allan Poe's work. Without knowing anything about Edgar Allan Poe, we can deduce by just looking at the title of his works that he is not gonna be talking about rainbows and unicorns and happily ever afters, because his works comes with a title: The Cask of Amontillado, Raven, Alone. These are not happy words. These are on the sadder side of human emotion, and that is what Edgar Allan Poe is known for. Another one to consider is how are the lengths of the sentences. Some authors are known for long sentences, like it's kind of hard to pinpoint because one paragraph would actually consist or yeah, one two or three sentences would actually be one paragraph for that author. Dan Brown is, I think, most most authors, but especially for me, Dan Brown is known for that because he's using a lot of phrases and conjunctions. And on the other hand, from my readings, Paulo Coelho is using shorter sentences, so it's easier to read actually. Take for example his book The Alchemist. The first sentence of the first chapter, the first paragraph and sentence as well is the boy's name is Santiago. That's one paragraph for Paulo Coelho's work. And we have now, let's take a look at this again. For the second part, we are going to take a look at all the extra that comes into or that affects the literary work, which is our extra linguistic content, which is subjective because it is multifactored. So depending on my background as the reader, I will have a different interpretation of the text. Depending on what literary criticism lenses am I looking at. Am I looking at it from a historic point of view, from a cultural, or from a philosophical, or from a psychoanalytic point of view? I will come up with different interpretations as we would see for the example that I have for us. Now, in extra linguistic context, in my unprofessional, don't quote me on this one, unprofessional effort to kind of remember, we have cheese by, which is spelled wrong because I cannot think of other ways on how to make it fit. So the first one, we have cultural, historical, which would include the political things or political background during that time, social norms and conditions. So for example, we have here the story 100 Years of Solitude. This is an award-winning book But it's a hard book to read if you don't know the history of the people during the pre-colonial era. So when I was reading this book, I was simultaneously researching the history of the people, the history of that place, because especially the colloquial terms doesn't make sense to me at all. So there are books that we do need to know the cultural or the historical background for us to have a better understanding of it. Another one, we have intertextual, like we have to relate it to other texts, and then it would also I would also include here the archetypes. For example, of intertextual relations to text, for J.R.R. Tolkien's story, The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, it's not quite easy to just jump into Lord of the Rings 3 without without watching or reading 1 and 2. It well, you can still understand the story, but you wouldn't have the full experience of it. So, and actually, for if you look into YouTube, they have created a whole the whole different universe, alternative universe of J.R.R. Tolkien's world. Another example is Shrek. Now, when we look at Shrek, it's integrated a lot of the Disney characters or fairy tale characters, and for us to understand the quirks and the personality of the characters, it would be much better if we know the story of Rumpelstiltskin. Why is he so grumpy? Or the gingerbread man, why is he acting that way? Or Fiona, why is she that way? Be- Without knowing the personal story of this before they were put together in the movie Shrek. And on the pie part, we have the more personal. These are psychoanalytic, our ideologies, morals, philosophies, religious beliefs, and the experiences or emotions that inspired the author to actually make the literary piece of work. Now, for our example, we have here, pardon me, I chose a very simple one because this is short, but I think this can help us understand. At least that's how it works for me. I hope it works for you too. So Humpty Dumpty, let us erase everything that we know about Humpty Dumpty. We don't know anything about it. So on a micro context, we can dissect it just like we do in grammar classes. So Humpty Dumpty, subject, sat on a wall, predicate. Now, we could assume that Humpty Dumpty is a thing or a person or a proper noun. It's a name because it's capitalized. So H and D. Sat on the wall. Sat is an active verb which which gives us the impression that Humpty Dumpty is a living thing because he can sit, he can move. All right. Now Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men. Now on this part, even though like as we could imagine, as we could have the feeling, the first two sentences have a relaxed tone. Now going to the third line, you kind of like, because the text is compacted in a line originally, so you have this feeling that you have to read faster, which would also in turn give the impression that there's this sense of urgency because all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. You're back into that relaxed mode. Now, on the last sentence, if we're going to take a look at it word by word, there is like a contradictory because on the on the first line, they use the word sat, which denotes that it's a living thing. Now, couldn't put Humpty together again. You don't put We put things together again. We make someone feel better again. So there is now this confusing, maybe confusion. There is now this confusion about this text. And let's take a pause for that for a moment and take a look at it on a macro context or per paragraph. So we have here there the rhymes wall, fall, men again, and we did some counting. It follows. It's good. It follows the classic rhyme or syllable pattern. 8, 8, 10, 10. Yes. All the king's horses and all the king's men has 10 syllables. Same with the second one. But again, it gives you the sense of urgency that something is falling. If something is there's an emergency. Now, on a micro context, we're taking a step back and looking at it as a whole picture, what does this text really mean? Who is Humpty Dumpty, or what is Humpty Dumpty? Now, right? So either we end there, we do more thinking, or we can go back, we can finally cut it, take it out of its literary text itself, and bring in the other factors um that might have or that might help us understand this particular piece of work. Now, adding in the extralingual context, we know that Humpty Dumpty is meant to be a riddle, and later on it was made into a children's song that we know now. So, on its analysis, if you're going to look at it from its culture and societal background, we could say that it's a drunk person or a clumsy person because in the 17th century, Humpty Dumpty was a drink. So when a person drinks a lot, they become wobbly, they cannot walk, and they keep on falling. So yeah, that's maybe what inspired people to write Humpty Dumpty. And another thing, if you look at it from a historical background, there are three possible theories, or there are three theories on what Humpty Dumpty might stand for. Humpty Dumpty might be a metaphor for a cannon for the siege of Colchester. So it's a cannon because Humpty Dumpty, it's the cannon, it's actually the name of the cannon. They put it on a wall so that it doesn't have any obstruction when it shoots. Now, because of the recoil, it causes a lot of vibration and the wall fell and came the cannon. And of course, the king's men and the king's horses, the army, doesn't have enough time to put it back together or make a wall again. So that's it. And we have another one. It might also be a metaphor for the beheading of King Charles. We don't need a picture for that, don't we? So, the beheading of King Charles because the king, Humpty Dumpty, sat on a wall like on the execution guillotine? No. Yeah, the execution where they chop it off. They chop your head off. And all the king's horses, his subjects, his royal court cannot do anything because they have lost the war and he is going to be beheaded. And there's nothing they can do about that. Another less popular is that it might be an allusion to talk about the death of Cardinal Wolsey, who is known to be this narcissistic cardinal who is high up on his wall, and he actually made a very elegant tomb for himself. Unfortunately, during his trial, he was found guilty of treason, and on that spot, he was killed and buried somewhere, not on his grand tomb that he has prepared for him. So you see, even in a historic detail, there can be lots of possibilities on how we can interpret Humpty Dumpty. Now, on a personal level, or the pie part, psychological and personal, Humpty Dumpty might be people. Like, when people fall, it's almost impossible for us to put them back together. Like, when they go through a traumatic experience, it's not easy. They can never be fixed. They can never be the same. Or, personally, I'd like to think that Humpty Dumpty is our values, such as the trust, reputation, because once it's broken, once you made a mistake, it's kind of hard to get that back, right? Or it could also be standing for innocence or a woman's purity. If you look at it from Carl Hugh's perspective, it could also be an archetype for children because an egg is generally archetyped as the start of life. So Humpty Dumpty is an egg, and there are children, and it was written during like war times. So the children are most affected by the situations. So as we can tell from here, Humpty Dumpty, even though it's a very very simple riddle or nursery rhyme, it is interpreted in myriad ways depending on how you are looking at it. And on that note, Well, I have some questions. I have a question actually. Do you agree or disagree that adding the extralingual context in an analysis of a written piece complicates things, just like our example? Yeah. Does it complicate things or does it give you a broader way of understanding it? And another question that I'd like, take for example, one would think that I am a plantita, even though I am not, because I just use this for the natural lighting, and this is my neighbor's house actually. Now, on that note, does it sound pretentious for authors to be writing literary pieces that are out of their experiences or background? Like, if you look at it from a linguistic point of view, they can do whatever they want. However, is it pretentious for them, or does it will it will they finally mm, give away the fact that they haven't gone through those emotions or experiences as we analyze their text? So, well, thank you so much for listening for today. Once again, I am Jasmine, and I hope you learned something from today's presentation. Thank you, and bye bye.